I haven't read that many books that I would actually call life-changing. A lot of books that I love, a lot of really fantastic books, but I think there's really only 6 books that made me a different person after reading them. Let's talk about these. They've been really hugely impactful for me personally. First, I have to talk about Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This is a story really permeated by the idea of queer shame, the experience of queer shame. And I think the way that I experienced queer shame before and after this book is drastically different. Most notably, it's, less shame now, which is great. Prior to reading this book, I had never connected so deeply with a character. I'd never read a character that felt like it was reading my diary, It's that moment where an author captures something so intimate about your own experience that you thought no one else had experienced it before, but of course it's probably actually a universal thing. The characters in here are falling in love in this gay relationship in the 1950s or 60s, and so the homophobia and the queer shame is so extreme and intense. I think ultimately this kind of made me feel like shame or discomfort with your own identity is just a waste of time. Obviously, it's a privilege to be able to say it's a waste of time, but that's the perspective shift that this book gave me. This book also made me fall in love with James Baldwin as a writer. It was the first Baldwin that I ever read, and he's proven to be a life-changing author in general for me. I've read so much of his work now, and these themes of love and shame and trusting yourself within your identity has been really huge for me. Written on the Body, like Giovanni's Room, is another queer story which is hugely impactful on my life. I grabbed this book when I was kind of just getting into queer literature, just getting into studying it. The way that this book handles gender was particularly impactful for me. The main character is not named, they're genderless. You can find hints in the story of maybe the gender that the author is kind of ascribing in the background, but overall, the story handles gender as something kind of elusive and mysterious, but also beautiful and powerful. At the core of the story, we have 2 people falling in love, one woman and then this genderless narrator. Eventually, one of the characters is diagnosed with cancer, and so this book was also really impactful for me and my experiences with health anxiety, actually. Prior to reading this book, I probably couldn't have handled reading a story about cancer, to be honest. It would have been a really anxiety-inducing experience for me, and in some ways this book was anxiety-inducing. But at the point in my life when I read it, I was finally getting to a place with my medical anxiety where I could handle reading a story that involves cancer and not have a mental breakdown in the process. So yeah, there's really 2 reasons why this book is huge for me. The queer narrative about gender and sexuality, but also the medical anxiety thing. And the fact that I was able to read the entire book and love the book makes it feel really big in my life. I feel like Written on the Body is a life-changing book for me because of the story itself, but also the surrounding circumstances of working through medical anxiety. Similarly, I think The Passion According to G.H. feels like a life-changing book for me more so because of the surrounding life circumstances and less to do with the story itself. I read this book over the course of last summer. I think it took probably a month or 2 to read in the end. It was a pretty difficult book to get through for me. Last summer was weird, and I'm still processing it in some ways. There were personal things in my life going on that were confusing. There was also a lot of medical problems and medical anxiety coming back up into my day-to-day life. The theme of the summer was kind of existential in some ways, and this book is very existential. The main character is at her house in Rio, and she sees a cockroach in one of her rooms. She freaks out, kills the cockroach, and then kind of spirals in this rambling existential crisis that goes on for 200 pages. Clarice Lispector's prose is meandering and confusing, and I've called it circuitous before. I think circuitous is the best description. The existential themes in here paralleled my real life over the course of last summer in some really interesting ways. This was definitely a life-changing book for me, although I think I'm still processing the way that it was so impactful. We're only, 6 months out from summer or less? I'm really interested to see how I feel about this book in 5 years. It'll be kind of funny to have this video as a time capsule to look back on. Did any of that make sense? I don't know. I don't think I have coherent thoughts on this book still. The Crucible is another book that was life-changing for me. I didn't really expect it to be life-changing, I gotta say, when I read it for the first time. I read this in high school for an English class, and it feels kind of embarrassing to say now, but in many ways this was a political awakening for me. This is a deeply political story story with allegories for the Red Scare in the 1950s. The research that I had to do while reading this book in school, the themes of society crafting an illusion which it attacks, all of this really made me look at the world and American politics differently. I think this book made me a skeptical person in a good way. I've only read it once. I haven't read it a second time. I don't tend to reread books that often, and in fact, I'm going to be reading Giovanni's Room only for the second time in the book club. I would love to read this again sometime soon. I think there are a lot of parallels today to the Red Scare period. It's a classic for a reason, because those themes are, probably always going to be relevant, unfortunately. Another book that I read pretty recently, I think this was last summer, Maurice by E.M. Forster. This was a really major book for me. The story, again, is about queer characters in the early 20th century. I think when I read this book last summer, I didn't have a clear grasp on the parts of my life where I was still maybe kind of living by other people's rules, living according to other people's expectations. I felt like, and I feel like I have generally moved past that kind of closeted experience of living according to other people's expectations. But when I read this book, which features heavily characters living according to social expectations, it kind of highlighted for me the parts of my life where I was still living according to fear or living according to what other people want. It was a little bit of a wake-up call for some areas of my life where I was kind of falling into my comfort zone and avoiding friction, avoiding tension so I could stay comfortable, but ultimately that comfort is toxic in the long run, Maurice really made me look at kind of what I was doing with my day-to-day more carefully and think about if it was how I wanted to be living. I think this book is proving, as I have some distance from it, proving to be kind of sustainably impactful. It feels more like something that's kind of a sustaining reminder to not live according to fear, to live according to yourself. I can kind of directly track some of the changes in my life and some of the things that I've been doing differently. I can directly track those changes to this book. So it feels really huge. And I think it's going to be something that kind of is a consistent reminder in my life to, again, not live according to fear. So, all right, backing up again a few years to an older book. I think I read The Unconsoled maybe in like 2019, so this has been in my life for quite a while now. This is a confusing Kafka-esque story by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's like nearly 600 pages of these bizarre long monologues from the characters. The main character shows up in some confusing, unnamed European town where he is supposed to give a piano concert, but he doesn't remember agreeing to the concert. He doesn't know any of these people, and he's super disoriented and confused. When I read this book for the first time, I was kind of shocked because I didn't know that you could do this with literature. I had never read anything like it before. It felt really unique and fresh, and it felt so deeply experimental that I felt kind of validated in my own writing. Not to compare stuff that I've written to the quality of this book. I think this book is really a masterpiece. But there have been times where I had written something that felt kind of insane, and I was like, this is so bizarre, it's probably terrible. And I think a lot of the writing was terrible, but for me this book affirmed that your writing can be bizarre and experimental and confusing, and it can still be good. This has been kind of a guiding light for me to, when I'm trying to write something, to lean into the insanity and to lean into the confusion. Ironically, I think this was one of Ishiguro's less successful books, if we're talking about sales, but it got printed, it got published, it has, endorsements on the back. I loved this book. So it was a good reminder, or kind of a good, maybe not even a reminder. It taught me kind of for the first time that literature can be really insane. And over the years, it's guided my writing, as I was saying, but it's also guided my reading quite a bit. It opened up my worldview about literature to the insanity that you can find in this art form. Now that I think about it, reading this book, I think actually set me up for reading The Passion According to G.H. The Unconsoled and The Passion speak to each other a little bit in terms of the circuitous, confusing writing style. So yeah, I think reading this like 7 years ago set me up to read Lispector. That's cool. I think having your perspective and your view of yourself and the world shift is one of the best things about reading. So it's cool to reflect on these and think about how they have really changed my life. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again soon.